Insists because of alleged fraud in Minnesota, they're feeling the backlash on social media, seeing less business in their stores.
9:12 a.m., Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. The morning traffic was moving slowly along the suburban commercial strip. To the casual observer, the single-story brick building on the corner looked like a standard childcare facility. Colorful cutouts of the alphabet were taped to the windows. A playground in the back stood silent, waiting for children. The sign above the door read, "Creative Minds, Daycare." But moments later, the silence was shattered. A convoy of unmarked federal SUVs swarmed the parking lot. Agents from the FBI, ICE, and the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, moved with synchronized precision. They weren't there for a compliance check. They were executing a federal search warrant on what intelligence analysts had identified as a ghost hub. This wasn't an isolated raid. At that exact moment, across the Twin Cities metro area, tactical teams were hitting 23 separate locations simultaneously. The target was a sprawling network of Somali-owned daycare centers suspected of defrauding the American taxpayer on an industrial scale. When agents breached the front door of Creative Minds, they expected to find the chaos of a busy daycare, dozens of toddlers.
The escalation follows a now viral video that shows what appear to be empty daycare centers, mostly run by the Somali community.
Shouting teachers, the noise of a facility licensed to care for 99 children. Instead, they found silence. The main room was empty. The toys on the shelves were covered in a thin layer of dust, undisturbed for months. The cribs and the nursery were pristine. There were no children. There were no parents dropping them off. There was only a skeleton crew of employees who looked stunned to see federal badges instead of their usual empty room. The investigation revealed that this facility alone had received $2.45 million in government subsidies over the last year. But the audacity of the fraud didn't stop at empty rooms. Agents discovered that Creative Minds had technically been shut down by the state months earlier due to irregularities, but the operators hadn't stopped billing. They simply slapped a new vinyl banner over the old sign.
But they have gotten repeated violation, 10 in June, that included the staff, that they had not completed training requirements, that children weren't put in there.
The new name was Super Kids. Under this new alias, the money kept flowing, the state kept paying, and the ghost children names pulled from stolen data lists kept attending every single day on paper. As agents secured the facility, the manager attempted to explain the lack of records. He told a story that left investigators stunned by its boldness. He claimed that just yesterday, one day after the HHS secretary had formally requested the attendance logs, a team of burglars had broken into the building. But these weren't ordinary thieves. According to the manager, they didn't steal the computers. They didn't take the cash or the electronics. He pointed to a hole smashed through the sheetrock wall connecting the daycare to the Family Dollar store next door. He claimed the thieves had broken in from the back kitchen, destroyed the wall, and stolen exactly one thing, the paperwork. They supposedly ignored the safe and the merchandise next door to steal the enrollment forms and employee documentation that would have proven the fraud.
Who's now got over 80 million views on this thing, found more in a matter of hours than Tim Walz and Keith Ellison, our Attorney General, have found in 7 years.
It was a cover story so thin it insulted the intelligence of the agents standing in the room, but it revealed the mindset of the network. They believed they were untouchable. They believed that no matter how obvious the lie, the checks would keep clearing. If you believe that stealing millions from programs meant for hungry children is a crime that deserves a mandatory prison sentence, hit the like button and comment justice below. The raids on the ghost daycares were just the first layer of the onion. As federal data analysts began cross-referencing the seized files with state property records, a second, even larger scam began to emerge. It wasn't just commercial buildings. The fraud had moved into the neighborhoods. Analysts flagged a disturbing pattern in residential zoning data. In the city of Brooklyn Park, which has a population of 84,000 people, there were 181 registered assisted living facilities. Compare that to Street Hall, a city of nearly 310,000 people, which had only 83. Why did a small suburb have more than double the number of care facilities than a major city? The answer wasn't a sudden surplus of sick people.
It is the tip of an iceberg, essentially, something that they are looking into there, as well as the Small Business Association. Kelly Loeffler, the head of the Business Business Association there.
Federal teams moved to investigate these residential homes. They pulled up to standard single-family houses that were billing the state millions of dollars annually for 24-hour specialized care. At one residence, agents discovered the owner was a man named Gandhi Muhammad, also known as Gandhi Abdi Kadai. His name was already famous in federal law enforcement circles. He had been indicted for laundering $1 million in the infamous Feeding Our Future scandal, the largest pandemic fraud in U.S. history. Yet, despite being under federal indictment, despite awaiting trial for stealing tax money, the state of Minnesota was still paying him. His wife was listed as the administrator of the assisted living facility. The state checks were still arriving every month, depositing taxpayer funds into the accounts of a family already charged with massive fraud. This network of residential scams had received $2.3 million in state money in the last year alone. Since 2016, this single group had extracted a staggering $49 million. When independent journalists and investigators knocked on the doors of these facilities, they were met with confusion. The residents, often elderly immigrants who spoke little English, had no idea their home was a registered medical facility billing the government for intensive services. They were props in a play designed to loot the treasury.
To a fraud scheme that totaled $250 million for funding that was for a nonprofit that was supposed to help hungry children.
The investigation revealed that this wasn't just about a few bad actors. It was about a system designed to be robbed. The barriers to entry were non-existent. The auditing was a joke. In total, federal auditors identified 7,900 fraudulent loans approved for these networks, worth approximately $400 million. These were Paycheck Protection Program (PPP) loans and Economic Injury Disaster Loans (IEDL) given to businesses that existed only on paper. The money was meant to save American jobs during the pandemic. Instead, it bought luxury cars, real estate in Kenya, and funded a criminal empire that was growing exponentially. The sheer density of the fraud and specific zip codes pointed to coordinated mills, shadow consultants who filled out thousands of applications for anyone willing to pay a kickback. They didn't just steal the money, they industrialized the theft. We're tracking the federal indictments for every business owner involved in this ring. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the list of names. As the scale of the operation became clear, the investigation expanded beyond Minnesota. This wasn't a local corruption scandal. It was a national crisis. The White House, briefed on the raids, released a staggering estimate. The total value of the fraud across these interlinked networks, spanning daycares, food programs, and assisted living, was estimated at $18 billion. To put that number in perspective, $18 billion could build 5 new aircraft carriers. It could end homelessness for veterans in every major U.S. city.
The latest allegations add to a growing list of fraud investigations in Minnesota. So far, 92 people have been charged, including 82 Somali Americans.
Instead, it had vanished into a labyrinth of shell companies and overseas transfers. The contagion had spread to the West Coast. In Kent, Washington, federal investigators focused on a facility called Aisha Home Childcare. State records indicated this single home had raked in $753,000 since 2022. The official capacity of the home was 12 children. But when a decoy investigator entered the property, they found a scene that looked more like a stage set than a daycare. A small group of children stood silently in a room. Not a single toy was out of place. There was no noise, no playing, no mess. It was Potemkin Village, a fake facade erected solely to pass a scheduled inspection. The owner, Sarah Mullen, had received nearly $113,000 in direct subsidies in just 2 years, on top of tens of thousands in social and health benefits. The system was paying them a salary, paying for their health care, and paying for their housing, all for running a business that appeared to serve almost no one. But the most damning evidence wasn't what was found, it was what was missing.
State and federal agents had already raided Ali's daycare center in South Minneapolis. The business was suspected of billing the government.
In a legitimate crisis where thousands of daycares were being shut down, you would expect an uproar. You would expect tens of thousands of angry parents flooding the phone lines of the governor's office. You would expect protests from mothers and fathers who suddenly had nowhere to drop off their kids so they could go to work. There was silence. There were no lines of parents. There were no angry mobs on social media complaining about the closures. The reason was chillingly simple. The parents didn't exist. The children on the rolls were ghosts. The families receiving the aid were synthetic identities or co-conspirators who received a kickback for lending their names to the roster. This silence proved the fraud more effectively than any audit. The entire ecosystem, the kids, the parents, the staff, was a fabrication. The political fallout was immediate and explosive. Critics labeled it state-sponsored theft. They argued that state governments, in their rush to push out welfare money without guardrails, had effectively partnered with the cartels. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz had famously touted his state's generosity.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has since faced intense scrutiny over the alleged fraud,
pushing for universal pre-K and expanded care. But investigators argued that this generosity was exactly what the fraudsters had exploited. By removing verification steps in the name of equity and access, the state had opened the vault door and walked away. The Creative Minds raid, the Super Kids sign change, the fake burglary, these weren't sophisticated crimes. They were clumsy, arrogant thefts committed by people who knew no one was watching. But now, the eyes of the federal government are wide open. The $18 billion party is over. The ghost hubs are empty, and the only lines forming in Minnesota today are the ones for booking photos at the federal courthouse. The question now is not just who stole the money, but who let them keep the keys to the vault for so long. Do you believe that state officials who allowed this fraud to happen through negligence should be removed from office? Yes or no? Comment below. Stay vigilant.